Everybody, this is Chris Jerome with the Radical Independent. I'm here with Michael Bridgford, independent for Iowa's first congressional district. Michael, thanks for being on.
Chris, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're in one of the closest, or maybe the closest House races in the country. I know District 1 in Iowa was decided by what, less than 800 votes in 2024. It's rated a toss-up again in 26. And there's about 200,000 or so voters in the district that don't belong to a party. And that's the largest single block in that district. Do you know what percentage that is in terms of?
I believe it's 36%.
Okay.
So like you said, it is now the largest group in the district. That wasn't always the case. It's grown. It's taken share from both the Republican and Democratic parties. And one other stat I would throw out there is that in 2020, it was decided by 6 votes.
Oh,
So
wow.
I think that was the second closest in congressional history. But yeah, it's one of the tightest districts in the country, and it's a three-time rematch of the same two partisan candidates. And like you said, the largest group of voters being independent. Happy to get more into the dynamics in the district, but a lot of that is what led into the decision to run.
Interesting. Yeah, that's exciting too. And it's also probably the block that's been ignored the most.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's a lot of frustration on both sides right now. You know, in Iowa, the ag base is traditionally Republican, and they're feeling a lot of pain right now due to trade wars, just
Yeah.
all the different economic environment that they're facing. And then you go to the other side of the pendulum, and Democrats are pretty frustrated that the national party pulled the first in the nation caucus away. So that's a big deal in the state. And
Hmm.
Democrats just haven't had a lot of success in Iowa. So Iowa, Iowa's a very independent-minded group of folks. I mean, that kind of goes back to that tradition of the first in the nation presidential caucus wanting to meet all the candidates,
Yeah.
wanting to learn and hear from everyone. So that was exhibited just earlier this summer in the Republican primary for governor, where Zach Lane defeated Randy Pincher, who had an endorsement from President Trump, which normally his endorsements carry the day, but in Iowa, like I said, folks are independent minded.
Right, right. And like a lot of independents, you're not a career politician, right?
Right. Yeah. This is the first. Yeah. So I'm 41. I'm a small business guy. This is my first time running for office. And again, just really feel like we've reached a moment where this is what we need. The pendulum's been going back and forth. We're not getting solutions, and I really feel like 2026 is the moment for this to happen because, we talk about now almost half the country identifies as independent. The
Right.
largest group of voters in our district, party approval ratings all-time lows, 25% or
Yeah.
less. And I think for what this movement's trying to break through with, I really think it's only possible in a midterm year. I think for we need to break through in a midterm year. I think in a presidential year, it's just challenging with all the additional noise that goes with
Correct.
that. And so I really feel like this is the moment where this has to happen. And with some of the serious issues we face as a country, I feel like if it doesn't happen, it's at some point it's going to become too late.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been following for probably about a decade a lot. And 2026 is the year of the independent to me, in my mind. There's so many good, quality, electable, reasonable independents running across the country in a lot of different states. And I think it's amazing. So I appreciate people like you stepping up and trying to, take advantage of this opportunity to, like you said, there is a lot of frustration out there.
One thing I would add there real quick, I think what makes this year unique also is there's national support, like in our case, we've been endorsed by the Ford Party, which was started by Andrew Yang.
Yep.
They provided great support. There's now a new initiative that we just launched last week called the Independent Leadership Council that Senator Joe Manchin was involved with. I was in West Virginia for that. And we got a lot of great headlines. They were actually yesterday on, several national media outlets, and even got a name. I got a shout out on Morning Joe, which was tremendous to hear from them. But yeah, but it's serious. I mean, they've raised now 8 figures to support a coalition of independent candidates this
Right.
year. And there, like you said, there are a lot of fantastics around a lot of fantastic candidates around the country. I've been fortunate to meet a lot of them, and I'm really, really just proud to be part of the group.
Yeah, and it's good that there's some organizations and groups out there that are kind of coalescing around independence because, independents are a wide-ranging group, and so it's hard to have a brand or a platform. So when you have some large institutions and organizations that you could be associated with, that gives people a sense of, oh, okay, it's there's a little bit more legitimacy there.
Oh, 100%. I think that's what's been what's been tough for independents in the past is a lot of times it's a candidate trying to do it on their own. They've got a few friends
Yeah,
helping them, and they're going up against the party system, which is just a real beast to go up against. And again, I think you add up all these factors of just the way the numbers have moved towards independence, the way part of it too is also the margin in Congress, with it being such
yep,
a tight margin.
yeah,
And even though all of us hate all the gerrymandering, it's horrible. It's actually leading to now we're going to likely have these permanently small majorities because just so few seats are competitive. I happen to be in one of the competitive districts, and but that adds more power to independents because it really would only take a small group. Right now in the House, Mike Johnson was elected speaker by 2 votes. It would just take a couple people to really make a massive impact day one in terms of having to say who the speaker is going to be, and with that also having to say what the rules of Congress would be to really make some change. Having single
right.
issue bills, getting a vote on term limits, could go on about these common sense things that most Americans want. They're not Republican or Democrat issues, but we're at a time things have gotten so far off track that we desperately need change, and right now it would only take a small group of people to really deliver it.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time. And I have a little graphic that I'll show on the page where you only really need a handful of
Mhm.
independents that can, I mean, it could change everything, change the whole equation, because then either we'll have a majority, they'll have to appeal to sort of the reasonable, sort of middle, pragmatic,
Mhm.
solutions-oriented group. And that could be just a huge start of something bigger. But yeah, you don't need that many to have a big impact.
Right.
Um,
And that's one of the reasons why this is, an attractive thing to do. I'll be candid. I have no interest in going out to Washington to just be a rubber stamp,
yeah,
backbench vote. To go through all this, I think that's what we need. We need people that can go and make a real change, hopefully day one, and if not day one, build to a coalition for the next election cycle. But the other thing I'd say is I know that there's also conversations being had with sitting members of both parties, more centrist types that are also frustrated with party politics and could
right,
even potentially defect to join a
right.
group to actually make these changes.
Just out of curiosity, is the remnants of no labels in your state at all?
I haven't worked with them in any way. I know Senator Manchin worked with them, a couple cycles back talking about running for president. But no, it's not something
Yeah.
that I'm aware of
Okay.
more
Yeah,
recently.
in Arizona, they
Mhm.
rebranded themselves as the Arizona Independent Party, which got them into
Yep.
trouble. The
Yep.
Republicans and Democrats sued them, but they worked and they're allied closely with the Ford Party in Arizona. But it's just that whole sort of non-duopoly, kind of centrist, reform-minded groups that are kind of getting together there. So before we jump into some of your issues and some of the things you care about, what talk a little bit about maybe some of the issues. I always ask the independent candidates this because there's a lot of hurdles when you're non-duopoly, whether it's gathering signatures, and of course money's a big thing, and just not having the infrastructure. But what's it been like as an independent trying to get this thing going?
Yeah, no, it's definitely a challenge. I mean, early on, part of me thought, I mean, there should be way more independents that run given these numbers, like we talk about with
Right,
voter registration and how people are identifying nationally. But then when you actually get into the process of running, it makes sense why a lot of people don't run. It's really hard. We were delayed launching the campaign by a few weeks just because getting vendors on board. We build a professional campaign. We have over 10 people, nearly 15 people working on this campaign. We have all the technology, all the back end type of things that you need to run a professional campaign. But the two parties have such a stranglehold on that infrastructure. We talked with a lot of vendors that loved our campaign, love our message, but just said, hey, if we were to touch you, we'll be blacklisted by the Democrats or blacklisted by the Republicans.
right.
And we just can't afford that for our business, which if I put myself in their shoes, I understand that. But it just goes to show you how being outside of the two-party system, it is really, I mean, it really is a bootstrap situation. And even, like the retail politics we're doing this summer, going out to county fairs and other events, the parties have their county infrastructure where they've got, people with a table and a booth. And so when you're trying to build that, as on your own as an independent, it just takes a lot more legwork. But hey, we're here to do it. We've only got 96 days to go. So
Yeah, and you did get your signatures, so that's great. That's a huge hurdle for a lot of people because I hear it from a lot of candidates where you have to get the paper, pen and pencil,
yes.
and that's a struggle these days because the I don't know, Main Street USA. everyone's online now, and you could do almost anything online, but you have to go out and try to knock on doors, which today everyone's got Ring. No one wants to answer the door. It can be a real struggle getting a lot of those. And of course, a lot of times it's just purely unfair. Independents and or third parties often have to get even more than the
Yeah.
major parties. So that's a huge thing. So it's great that you're able to get yours turned in already. So you're on the general ballot, 100%.
Yeah, yep. So in about 40 days, we got over 3,500 signatures, like you said, in person, knocking on doors, going to farmers markets. And I'm going to look at it from the positive side. We got to talk to a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah,
We got over 3,500 signatures, but like you said, in today's world, people are skeptical of fraud or putting their address down and their information. And I totally get that given everything you see. So we had a lot more conversations than 3,500 people. And I think that's to our strength. And that's where I think the parties are really failing in that they kind of stick with their safe spaces. They go to their party meetings or their
yeah.
curated, we're going out talking to everybody. So we're actually it's not just about what I have to say, it's listening to people in the district, what's important to them. And I'll tell you, when you tell people you're not a Republican, you're not a Democrat, people are really interested to hear more because people are really fed up with what's going on.
Oh yeah, they're exhausted at everything that's happening. And as an independent, I feel a lot of times you can build that broad coalition because you can pull moderate Republicans and Democrats, obviously a lot of non-affiliated or independents, but even other third parties. You got a pretty wide range, possibly, potentially, to draw in people. So that's a bonus. So in your state, do you have a Secretary of State or somebody like that where you can get good information for your as far as like
The voter file,
yeah, voter
yeah,
files type information, stuff like that.
yeah. So the Secretary of State has that. Also, we were fortunate to work with Good Party, and
Yeah, I was gonna
for
mention
very
them.
minimal, yeah, you can get the full voter data file
Yeah, yeah.
for, pretty minimal cost. So yeah, we've been fortunate. Like I said, we built this out professionally, and doing text campaigns. Obviously, social media is a big focus, and just really excited how it's going.
So, what are some of your primary issues? I mean, I've kind of looked at the site, but I'll kind of let you explain some of your top three, top four.
I think again, it starts with reform to Congress and government. I think that's what really has to happen. If we keep operating the way we are with these omnibus spending bills, going on beyond that, I think, like I said, it's a moment where we need to get a speaker that's not just the party leader on either side. We need to try to get somebody else committed to making some of these changes to change the rules, so Congress can operate how 90% of Americans want it to operate for it to bring some of its power back, as what should be one of the most powerful branches in government. And so that's a key focus. Obviously, affordability is a massive issue that we all
Right.
face. I face it myself. I pin a lot of that back to our fiscal recklessness. I mean, we're 40 trillion in debt now. We're adding 2 trillion a year. And to fund that debt, since COVID, we printed over $8 trillion.
Right.
And it took us from the start of the country to 2009 is how long it took us to get 8 trillion originally. And now we're just added 8 trillion in 6 years.
Right.
When you drop that kind of money, you're going to have inflation. You're going to have things go up in cost. And if we keep operating the way we are fiscally, that's not going to change. And that's where both parties, I feel like, are running on that issue. That's what Republicans ran on in 2024. Democrats are now wanting to run on that, but neither one of them are serious about actually
No,
addressing it. And I
no,
think it's going to take independence to do that.
yeah, it will. Problems can't get solved. The incentive structure is completely perverse and broken, right? It's political theater, and
Hmm.
we're not a problem-solving enterprise anymore. It's a joke. And so you talk about the national debt and the deficit, and now something like $1 trillion of the budget is just the interest payment. It's incredible. That's one thing I really like about your page is you are a lot more sort of reform minded because a lot of people want to talk about immigration and healthcare, and that's great. You got to talk about that for sure, but you got to look at the processes and the structures in place and kind of deal with those in order to get to the other things to make a lot of those policy decisions. So I like the really sort of reform minded aspect that you have. What else you got going on the page?
Yeah, I mean, I think healthcare is another
Yep.
issue that is really impacting all of us, and there's some really common sense bipartisan things that we could do there that the parties just can't seem to come to the table on, and that's where I think we need independence. Just simple things like price transparency. Healthcare is one of the only industries where you have no idea what something's going to cost you till you get a bill 2 weeks later, and it just almost feels like a made up number. So basic things like that, price transparency, PBM reform, things where there's so much money that the middleman are taking that are really adding little
Right.
value. And that's where this cost creep is. And that's because the special interests, sadly, effectively own the parties. That's who's funding their campaigns and that's who they answer to. And that's where independents are really needed because we won't have a special interest to answer to. We won't have a party boss to answer to. And these things are really just common sense. Again, not really red or blue things. It's just getting people free from these perverse incentive structures that we have in Washington.
Right. Right. One more big one for you.
Another
We
big
got the
issue. I mean, I'm in Iowa, so ag is a really important issue here.
right.
And honestly, I think it's important for our country. One of the most important things for a government is to have a secure food supply. If we lose that, I mean, none of this other stuff matters. So we've got to take care of our farmers. Farm bankruptcies are increasing. We're staring at a situation similar to the 1980s crisis that we went through here in the Midwest. And again, Congress is just it's political football with this. The last farm bill was passed in 2018. And a lot of that, again, is tailored towards the special interest, the big ag monopoly companies, and we need to really take it back to a focus on family farms. I grew up on a seventh generation family farm, so that's obviously near and dear to me, still in the family. I'm actually heading out there today after this interview to spend some time. And so we've in Iowa, we really have to focus on our family farms, and that's important beyond Iowa to the whole country.
Right. How have the tariffs and maybe even Iran situation, how's that affected farming there?
Yeah, negative impacts there, with what's going on in the Middle East. That's raised fertilizer prices by over 30%. A farmer told me 50%. Obviously, diesel prices have been heavily impacted now or they've approached $5 a gallon. And that was at the time when farmers were out in the field trying to plant their crop in the springtime. And now obviously it's surging again now. But farming's tough because it's one of the few industries where the farmer doesn't control the price that they sell their product at, and they also don't
Right.
control the price of their input. So they're kind of stuck with what they're offered. And right now, no one's looking out for them. Both parties have kind of turned their back on the farmer. And again, if you don't have a secure food supply, you don't have a country. And so that's something that we need to address before it becomes a crisis like it was back in the 1980s.
So just going back real quick, touching on some of the reforms, let me throw out a few, see what you think. So term limits, is that something that you could support?
That would be a number one issue. Honestly, Chris, I think if I could get there and we could get term limits in, I'd probably just want to come back home and be done. Um, I think that's something that if it's a situation where I get to have a say on who the speaker is,
Right.
that would be a core issue where I would want to vote on. I mean, now I don't expect it to pass. I think all these politicians campaign on term limits. They talk about term limits, but in reality, I don't think they would support them. And that's unfortunate. But I would at least like to see a vote on it.
Yeah. And whether or not you could have much effect, a lot of it does boil down to states running elections as well and stuff. But things like ranked choice voting or
Sure.
and you got, primaries are a big problem because a lot of times that's kind of where the decision is made because there's no competition in the general, and the primaries can be very distorting. So you have like open primaries, and I talk about independent primaries, which is its own thing that no one's ever heard of. But um,
Hmm.
I feel like there's a lot of reforms that, because I'm all about free, fair, and competitive elections, right? That's what the radical
Mhm.
independence all about.
Yes.
The honest consent of the governed, right? The sincere will of the people, not this artificial corrupt. I call it the corrupt rig duopoly. So,
Yeah.
the structural systemic reforms, the election reforms and political reforms, campaign finance, stuff like that. That's really important. So it's always great to hear people talking about some of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah, no, I mean, and obviously, I think trying to get rid of Citizens United, all the money in politics, that would be a big issue. Again, it'd be a challenge, but I think that's something we should try to do. I agree with you on the elections. I think that should, I'm a big believer in the Constitution. That should sit with the states, and like here in Iowa, we have a primary which no party independent voters aren't allowed to participate in. Yet our taxes, and again, in our district, it's the largest group of voters. Our
Right.
taxes are going to pay for the primary, and yet we can't even participate.
Right.
And as you said, then we're stuck with those options in November. So no, I'm all for that reform. And at the state level, we should be looking at all of those options.
Definitely. Well, Michael, good luck. We definitely need more independents out there to shake things up. I feel like this is going to be a good year. People who can put real solutions over ideology or party, right? That's kind of what it's
Yeah.
all about. But people can look you up at bridgeford4iowa.com.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And I'll put
And we're
that in the
also
description. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, we're
Oh,
on social media, Facebook and Instagram, all the, TikTok, kind of all the standard platforms. And, come look for us there. We've put up a lot of different content. So
for sure.
appreciate all,
Definitely.
Chris, I appreciate all you're doing for the movement. I mean, I know you've got a lot of followers and just super impressive what you've been able to build. This really is the year for it. I think we have to sort of tip of the spear breakthrough. And that's what I tell people, whether it's, it's not about me. This is about the movement. This is about independence actually breaking through and getting success to make some of these changes. Because candidly, the job seems like a pretty big headache out there. And so if others could break through and I get to stay home, I wouldn't be the worst outcome for me. But we've got to make progress this year as a movement to really get a few folks in. Because I think the other thing there is if just a few, a handful or less get through, we're going to have 25, 30, 50 people run the next cycle. And that's where we're going to really be able to make some massive changes.
Absolutely. Michael, I appreciate you taking the time.
Chris, it's so nice to talk to you. Thank you.